You're my favourite. You are the best.
Who the hell are you?
All to open.
Yes, and what do you do?
I'm the doctor, and I just snogged Madame de Pompadour.
There comes a time, Time Lord, when every lonely little boy must learn how to dance.
Here come the drums!
So here it comes, the sound of drums. Here come the drums, here come the drums.
Hello, and welcome to Pull to Open, a podcast that goes randomly through all of the stories in Doctor Who. My name's Chris Taylor.
And I'm Pete Paschal, and we're a couple of guys who are journalists by day, podcasters by rest of the day, and have written a lot about Doctor Who, obviously watch it feverishly and often.
Yes.
And
previously on Pull to Open, we were in the Forest of the Night with Peter Capaldi. Then the randomizer that we rely on to take us through the Pull to Open Codex took us to the Forest of the Dead and its first part, The Silence of the Library. And now we have arrived, amazingly, in an episode and a story that bears a lot of connections, the previous one. It is story number 173 in the Pull to Open Codex. Ladies and gentlemen, The Girl in the Fireplace.
Boop, 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 pew, pew, pew. Crowd goes wild.
We have arrived in the fireplace very, very early on in our run in season 3 and episode 5 of Pull to Open. We're here.
I got to say, given the history of our pod that you've just gone over, this seems like the least random randomizer pick that
it truly does. It truly does. Sometimes we're stretching to explain why the randomizer brought us here. I will fully admit that. But after the last episode in which we talked about Moffat and RTD being the Who Beatles, when they work together, they always just knock it out of the park. You know, they're the John and Paul. And here we go to one of their earliest collaborations, which was perhaps more of a collaboration than any. So I'm fascinated to get into it. But first, let's talk about our week on social media. Pete, how have we been doing?
Yeah, it's been a big week on the socials. So as Chris just mentioned, one of the episodes we just recently did was In the Forest of the Night. That's been on TikTok all week long. Now, interesting things that have come out of that. So I think I was kind of dead on in the beginning of that podcast where I suggested that it might be an episode, but that people love to on it, which is to say it's very memorable for being not super great or delivering on what it is. Yeah. But there were some people who liked it, and that's fine. We found redeemable things in it, like everything in Doctor Who that you kind of admire the ambition of it, at least. But there was, I wanted to start a new thing here on Pull to Open, which is to give a shout out to the best TikTok comment we got all week.
I have a contender for this, but go ahead. I want to hear yours.
Yeah, well, mine is when we took a little segment where you talked about the people burning the trees, and it was the Cobra team. And we were talking about how that being kind of a silly Chekhov's gun that they never really pay off. And why the hell Cobra, which was a good aside. Like, there's been any number of Doctor Who organizations that they've shown why bring this new thing up. And one of the commenters suggested would have been funnier, and this is Stranger Danger with a 3 in the E, would have been funnier if it was Torchwood burning the trees.
Yes.
Which I have to, that's pretty on the nose, but I would have allowed it.
That was my favorite. That was my favorite comment too. So we absolutely agree on that. Thank you so much for that. It was one of those few TikTok comments which I had to tell my wife about, and then we laughed about it as well. So thank you for spreading the joy, TikTok people.
Yeah, I'm in my mind. That's part of, I don't know, somewhere between Torchwood seasons, maybe the last two. That the Cobra is just sort of a covert cover for them. So, and they also did remind us, I haven't lived in the UK for 25 years, so sometimes these things slip my mind, but Cobra is actually a real organization. It is sort of the crisis group that meets in Downing Street. Wow, it's not a ruthless terrorist organization determined to rule the world? You'd think
maybe there was some connection to the Cobra in G.I. Joe, but no. It is an actual organization, and Boris Johnson got in trouble for not attending meetings early on in the COVID crisis. So
Oh, wow.
it kind of came up a lot more after in the Forest of the Night. So
Right.
British people really know what it is now.
Because of Boris Johnson's little-known fear of snakes. That's why he didn't show up.
Indeed. In any case, talking of Pull to Open's connection to the real world, I believe that we have some exciting news about what our show has done for HBO Max.
Indeed. So, as I was, as we were prepping all our social material, shall we say, for the TikToks, it didn't escape our notice that In the Forest of the Night had a bit of a misspelling on HBO Max. It actually spelled it night with a K.
God, I just, as an editor, that made my eye twitch every time I saw it.
Yeah, clearly done. Input by someone who had not seen the episode. Clearly not a Doctor Who fan. Anyway, as one does, this is the modern way of doing this. You shout out to the service on Twitter, and we did. And I'll fair to say we were very polite. We just said, "Hey, could we get this corrected? It's wrong. It should be night with an N." And I gotta give a lot of admiration and shout out to HBO Max's customer service. They replied right away. We got in a direct message back and forth, and not only did they listen, they fixed it within a like 24 or 48 hours. I don't know, very quickly. Like you think that would be something that would kick to the bottom of the pile to get to it months later? No, it's fixed now. Go check it now. I mean, now as I'm recording this, like you're going to hear this in a week, but I'm really impressed with the speedy response there. Way to go, HBO Max.
Yeah, thank you, HBO Max. I definitely want to give plaudits to the streaming services where they're warranted. HBO Max, I sort of ambivalent about as a home for all of new Doctor Who, which it is. It's the only place you can watch it unless you're buying the individual episodes. And it is sort of a little bit difficult to do what we're doing and sort of randomly dipping out of episodes, right? I find that I have to search for it all over again.
Mm-hmm.
Right, search for Doctor, because I could go play next episode of what I was last watching, but that's not going to take me to the menu where I can get to the episode that I need to get. So HBO Max, just an idea. Thanks for listening to us on Forest of the Night, but just an idea. Maybe put Doctor Who as sort of a thing you can easily access from the homepage, because there are a lot of us here. A lot of us are going straight there. We're Who fans. We want to dip into any part of the Doctor's timeline. As if we were Clara splintering ourselves through time. So please make that more accessible.
Well, I would also think since it's so recent, it was so recently new that the season just finished a month or two ago, and we just had the New Year's special. This is sort of the period where people want to catch up.
Yeah.
So having it front and center is probably a good idea, a good way to capture new viewers.
Yeah, exactly. That's the way Doctor Who spreads.
So that might not be an HBO Max thing. That might be a thing a note for BBC Worldwide or BBC, I forget what they're calling it now, but it is, there's some marketing dollars here that are probably good to be spent.
Yes. And while we're talking marketing dollars, we are still looking for sponsors. Just saying.
Yep, we're here too. Okay, so little pat on the back to ourselves there, and you're welcome, Doctor Who fans.
Yeah. And we also have, speaking of fans, we have a super fan on Twitter who we'd like to give a shout out to. Pete, who's the superfan? Superfan
is Patrick Perring. Patrick, who is probably our most faithful listener, always gives us a great shout out on Twitter really soon after we upload the podcast. And he's always been quite positive and has shared with us thoughts on the platform. So, Patrick, thank you so much for being a great superfan.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. We're here for you, bud. We love anyone who loves to dip in and out of Who, as we do.
Yeah. So one more bit of housekeeping, and I hope I pick up some more as I'm doing it, because as you can tell, I'm kind of stalling for.
Could it be something to do with reviews, perhaps?
Could have something to do with reviews. Well, this isn't stalling. This is actually business. You're right. Thank you for reminding me. One is we need some reviews, guys. We've been asking for the reviews. We want some more reviews. Please give us reviews. Reviews really help us make the podcast more visible to others. If you're listening to this, and if you're not, I don't know how you're hearing me, but please visit your nearest podcast app, the one that you're on, perhaps, and why not give us a thumbs up, and just pause the playback for a minute, give us some thumbs up emoji, and go back to what you were doing. But the reviews really, really do help.
Yeah, you are exempt from this if you're an alien race who's listening to us through radio waves coming out from the Earth, and it's probably a couple of centuries later, and it's too late to leave a review anyway, because we will have watched all of Doctor Who by that point. But if you are currently on the planet Earth, this does apply to you. Please leave us a single emoji review. This is what I'm pushing for. Just leave us a scarf, leave us a hat, lobby the emoji code people to make a fairs emoji. But yeah, just say something. Give us a shout out. We're here.
Awesome. And, we like to think about stars while we review, and I see 5 in front of me all the time. Thinking about reviews. I don't know about you.
I always see 5 stars.
And the last thing I need to do is just do a quick correction on myself, just because it's been nagging at me. This is one of those things that's been nagging at me since we recorded the pod. So we did Silence the Library Forest of the Dead last time. And one of the things I pointed out was there was like a point where the doctor points his sonic screwdriver down, effectively turns it into a square gun and squares out the thing behind it.
Right. He's escaping. He's escaping 2 of the astronauts who've been taken out.
Right, exactly.
Archaeologists have been taken over by the Vashnarada.
Right, exactly. And so it was weird, and it was out of there and out of place. And obviously, he's never used that ability again. But on rewatch, I actually was just sort of, as I was sort of, again prepping the socials, I noticed. I think it's actually a door. I don't think he's actually using it to square gun. He's actually just opening a hatch beneath him that happens to be square, which again might be a weird thing, but it's like, oh, it's not actually a plot hole that he never uses that again. He actually never squared it. So good job, guys, for paying attention. Which is the show creators.
we love being corrected here on Pull to Open. Many podcasts may not. Many podcasts may stick to weird views, but no, we're happy to share your knowledge with our own brains that are fallible and incomplete and partially clockwork. So we love accessing this big global brain of Doctor Who fandom because you remind us of that stuff. Also, I couldn't remember exactly where we landed on that. I sort of feel like I remember saying that what the Clara Splinter did in that episode was to open that door at just the right time.
Right.
Which explains why the Doctor never used that sonic power again. So
yeah, I envisioned her there with a saw, basically, before he got there. Like, it's ready for you.
Yeah.
So we could stick with that one too.
Indeed, that was my saw impression, by the way, not punching a baboon
or not a materialization.
Yeah, that's the super fast, ludicrous speed dematerialization of the TARDIS. You're welcome.
Cool. By the way, I prefer retcon to correction. Let's
please retcon us. That should be a great alternate title for the podcast. Please retcon us.
Wow, I love it.
Yeah.
All right.
Think of that as our second tagline after Doctor Who Randomized. All right, it is time to get to this week's story and the segment that we start every time before we get into it. And we're going to do so again with the Girl in the Fireplace, is TLDW, Too Long Didn't Watch, or Too Long Doctor Who, or Too Long Did Watch, in this case, because I think every Who fan has seen this one. So we give one of us, and this turn it is Pete, 1 minute per new Who episode, 30 seconds per classic Who episode. So you have 1 minute, Pete, to summarize in record time The Girl in the Fireplace with no notes. You've closed all of the windows.
Yeah, I've seen nothing except for the light of my camera now.
I
was stalling for a while there, you could probably tell. But at some point I was like, okay, let's just get this over with. And now I realize, like, I usually read a plot summary in addition to like watching the episode just to make sure I've got it all in my head. I haven't done that this time. So suddenly I feel my confidence evaporating as I'm about to embark on this, but I've got to do it because that's what we do here at Pull to Open.
It's such a well-known story. I feel like previous viewings are here for you.
Yeah.
They're on your side.
Right, sip of water and then I'm ready.
All right.
Okay.
All right. In 3, 2, 1. Go.
Okay, the Doctor, Mickey, and Rose materialize on a space station in the future. There's something weird going on because the power is like massive. It can punch a hole in the universe, and they quickly find out there are time windows to pre-revolutionary France, and there's a little girl on the other side of one, and the Doctor meets her goes through it to meet her and realizes robots have come from the future space station and are strangely visiting her at different points in her life.
30 seconds.
He comes repeatedly back to see her at various times. When she's an adult, they sort of almost have a romantic relationship, even though it's only been a few minutes for the Doctor. It's been years for her. They put it together that these robots have gone haywire and basically have decided that they need to harvest the brain of Madame de Pompadour, who the girl happens to be, and for their ship to work. So the Doctor actually shatters all the time windows to prevent them from doing that, robbing the robots of their mission and what they're doing. But he comes back to the space station, and the girl dies later because she's grown up, and he never gets a chance to say goodbye to her. Sorry, I didn't do it.
Oh, so close though, so close. You got to the part where we always we unite as Doctor Who fandom and say, why couldn't he just go visit her in the TARDIS before she dies?
Yeah, that's true. It's probably one of the first things we should tackle in this commentary. It is a simple story. I got a little lost in, it's as we always do in the TLDWs.
It's so much pressure.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to leave out, and this is one of those episodes where there are so many great emotional beats that I wanted to stop and talk about, because this is, you could talk about the plot, but when I got to the romantic part of it, I really wanted to I did not say we're going to talk about it now, but it's like that's really what this story is about,
right? And
it just, when you talk about the story, it just seems so inadequate.
Yeah, it's kind of a rom-com. It's certainly a poignant romance. The Doctor is, for the first time, and perhaps arguably one could say, we could talk about this, depending on how you feel about, his whole story with Rose, perhaps the most romantic single episode.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Yeah.
I'd agree this is the most romantic single episode involving the Doctor and the most overt exploration of the character's own sexuality.
Yeah, and sex is clearly the defining factor, because it is a myth. We'll just get this right out of the way, that the fact that Madame de Pompadour invites the Doctor to dance is a reference to to having sex with the Doctor. Reference to the Doctor dances, where that's clearly what it meant. But no, Moffat has said he did not intend that. It's just that Moffat is such a lusty writer that this sort of stuff just comes out anyway. So even though there's a shot of the bed, and there's some very clear implications, and there is actual snogging, we will get to the use of the word snogging in a second.
I knew we would. We're getting right into it this time. We're going right to the.
We're going right to
the robots or the space station at the time. We're going right to the sex part.
Right to the snogging.
Yeah.
And the shagging. But yeah, there is no definitive shagging in this episode. I'll just say that it is.
No, there isn't. I mean, I think if you really want it to be, and if you do, I don't know why Doctor Who's your show. There are plenty of others. Where it's a little more.
You
overt.
watch the show, and then you go to AO3, right, or one of those, the collections of slash stories and fan stories, and you.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think if you really want it out there, you can. I'm not telling you what to put in your own Doctor Who universe, but I think it's It's just very Moffat is great at this, actually, and so is Davies to a certain extent. They walk right up to the line, and they never quite go over it. I mean, the bed scene in particular, I found okay, it's just is right there in the foreground at the end, and she took him by the hand to the bedroom, and you're just like, wow, okay, what's going to happen here? And then it's like, oh, the fireplace. Oh, okay, great.
To be honest, though, there is only one episode of Doctor Who that makes it explicit that the Doctor has had sex, and it is episode 1, An Unearthly Child, where we learn that he has a granddaughter.
Well, he's also been a father before. They've said that in The Doctor's Daughter, and there's a few references to his family. But yes, I take your point. So
the Doctor shags is what I'm saying. It's a fact. We've always known it. Calm yourselves, classic Who fans. We've always known it.
I see what you did there with the subtle Silicon Valley paraphrase. But yeah, this is like, let's get right into it. I mean, this is the thing is the Doctor's sexuality has always been something of a bit of a controversy in Doctor Who, and it was very much not really touched at all. I mean, here and there, there's comedic bits in the classic series, but in the new series, with the sort of storytelling they were doing, and honestly, just updating the show in a lot of ways, I think they had to go there. And I think to Davies' credit, and I think he's the one who really opened the door on all this, he handled it with aplomb in series 1, where a older man takes younger girl to travel with him. I mean, how could you not go there? In particularly with modern audiences, where obviously in 2005 when the show was relaunched, this there's a lot of protection, shall we say, in greater society against exploitation of those kind of relationships than there were when the show was first the classic series was on. You kind of had to, and so I'm glad they did, and they used it to a lot of comedic effect, but not and starting the whole Rose love story, which obviously there's a lot of tension with that here. But when in this story, I think you really just like, we could talk a little bit about Whittaker too, like the fact that the Doctor has been played by a man. Now, he hasn't just been played by a man, and I think anyone watching this episode, if you're sort of saying the Doctor's an asexual being who doesn't really have a gender, like, watch The Girl in the Fireplace. Like, what, are you kidding me? Like he's a man. I mean, like, and admittedly, like a wise, aged Time Lord man, that the rules are different and the sexuality is different, but no question he's male right now in this episode.
No, we know from the existence of a granddaughter that, Time Lords have sex. It's just a fact. And if Moffat and RTD are the Beatles of Who, as we have suggested, they're the John and Paul, then The Girl in the Fireplace is very much their I Want to Hold Your Hand, where it's very clear they are not just singing about wanting to hold your hand. This is, clearly an episode relevant with not just sexuality, but the romance that comes from the connection of the minds between the two of them.
Yeah,
right? The Doctor puts his hand on Reinette's head and they share everything. And she sees how lonely he was. He becomes vulnerable for possibly the first time in New Who, possibly the first time ever that he's been that vulnerable. And, he's mentioned that his childhood was lonely before, but for someone else to see it like that, almost without his consent, as it were, he's being more vulnerable than he wants to be. He's sharing more than he wants through that connection because he has to look in her brain.
I really like that scene for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, it's redolent of romance, right? I mean, that is what romance is at its roots. So it's romance and sexuality all mixed into one. But go ahead.
Well, it's the heart of the episode, obviously, and both the leads play it so well when they do that. Like the facial expressions, particularly on Sophia Miles, which I think that's how you pronounce her name.
Yeah.
They are they're just, it's played to a T. And I think this sort of brings up an uncomfortable question of like, why hasn't he ever done that with other companions or Rose or Clara or whoever? And I don't really have a good explanation for that, but I do feel like sometimes this is sort of a difference between romantic partners and friends, and the intimacies we share with them are inherently different. And I know he doesn't do so quite so deliberately here. She walks back through, and he doesn't expect it. But that idea of sharing your vulnerabilities with someone new you have a connection with, and things you might not even share with your family or your closest friends, I think that's very human and very real. And I don't know.
And really, very good friend.
In other words, it's like, I still believe it, even though it kind of necessitates that I forget that he did that, or he hasn't done that with his companions generally.
I mean, I would like to posit that the Doctor is a romantic in all senses of that word. I mean, in the way that he dresses, she dresses, the way that she travels through the cosmos looking for adventure, and friendship and connection with other people, and just wanting to help. Totally a romantic. There's a reason why Gallifreyans have two hearts, people. It's because one heart cannot contain all all the love that this person has for time and space and everyone in it. And while, the other Time Lords may have buried their two hearts under layers of fusty, non-interventionism, the Doctor is always someone who is very much open to that, who has opened both of her hearts to the universe and its people. So it's, we need to explore that more often. Need to be more explicit about that. And I like it when the show does that. I like that they have turned the corner into bringing the Doctor and Yaz together in where we're at this point in the current show. It's just
right. Well, we'll see.
But I do want to take it back to snogging, because that is still
that's
a line.
Back to snogging, guys.
That is still a line, because the line is as the Doctor presses the button and flips the fireplace around, which, by the way, made me feel like that's one part I don't think has aged well. The flipping fireplace, just sort of feels like a stage farce.
Which it is, actually. Just a quick side note is that they did build the spaceship set right next to the room set, and when the Doctor kneels down to talk to young Renette, they're actually facing each other, which is kind of a neat thing. So it's one of those things where I think they took the story. I mean, I don't know. I don't know the realities of making a TV show, but they probably took it a little too literally when it might have been better served by today. If they made it today in 2022, I think you'd CGI all that.
Yeah. If it's a magic door, as the Doctor tries to avoid saying but ends up admitting it is, then have it be a door that is magic.
Yeah.
That said, it is obviously a very cheap episode. We're very early into the run of New Who here. Doesn't have the budget that we'd later have, and hats off to them for the way that they made this look not cheap, and we'll get to a lot of the ways in which they did that. But as the Doctor is flipping this fireplace, and on the fireplace he says his parting shot to the French servant who walks in and says, who are you, monsieur? He's like, I'm the Doctor, and I'm the man I snogged Madame de Pompadour. And I just still, all these years later, I'm over the Doctor's sexuality. I was one of those classic Who fans. I was like, oh, I'm not sure about this. Still not over that line. Still don't think that's a very Doctorish line. To be that sort of giddy about it immediately, I don't know. It feels like with the Doctor, his crushes develop pretty fast, but maybe not that fast. And he's not that schoolboyish.
It worked for me.
Yeah.
I think partly because it's Tennant. So Tennant is, you talk about the Doctor being romantic. Tennant really is a romantic. I mean, in the sense that he is a professional romantic lead, certainly at this point in his career, and obviously factored into his casting. The other thing I would say is, I think at this point he isn't giddy necessarily about just snogging someone he fancies, but that he's just realized she's a historical figure.
Yes,
that he loves history, and I like
point.
This episode for a lot of reasons. I mean, there's so much to like about it. I mean, it's another New Who classic, but the whole story kind of in a big picture show sense lends a lot of weight to the Doctor's name dropping throughout the rest of the series, because you see it
really
here in real time, the deep connection he forms with a historical figure, which, obviously specific reasons for it. But I like this idea, the Doctor jumping around history, because it's not the idea sold in this episode. He jumps around history and has great times with Marco Polo and everyone else, right?
And we hear about it a lot. And one of the best, almost the only purpose that Mickey and Rose serve in this episode is to have that conversation about the Doctor, where Mickey's sort of needling Rose about, first Sarah Jane Smith, which reminds us. Yes, didn't he call Cleopatra Cleo? But I think that almost speaks to my point, because the Doctor is always he's never necessarily kissed and told, right? He doesn't say it as overtly as I snog Madame de Pompadour. It's just they have to guess that because he calls Cleopatra Cleo, there's something more going on there, right? It was such a long game of learning what happened with Elizabeth I. Right. So he's not a kisser and teller. Maybe he just thought the servant was some guy who's never going to see again.
I will agree. You're convincing me a bit. That is, he's sort of stepping out of his normal veneer. I do think it's in character, because this is all about peeling back layers and seeing the heart beneath. And
Hmm.
he's actually kind of more vulnerable there than he would be to his right in front of his companions, I think.
It's weird that I convinced you that, because I think you convinced me, and I think now we've switched like a fireplace. We have switched sides.
But you're
This
dead
whole
on.
debate.
He's not the type to kiss and tell and brag about
Yeah.
it. It's just
Yeah.
that he's just in the moment there, and I think he sort of writes himself later.
To his credit, he doesn't do it with Rose, although he does sort of rather rub the how much fun he's had at the party thing in her face. Although, even though that turns out to be a con on the Clockwork Robots, which
Right.
did you really need to be drunk to pretend to be drunk to get past those not very smart Clockwork Robots?
Yeah.
know?
Probably not, but again, it's a fun scene.
It is.
It makes you
I
think.
remember I had an issue with that scene at the time. I really did. For
Well-
some reason, I remember thinking, "Oh, the Doctor's turned into Jarvis Cocker." It was the lead singer of Pulp. It kind of had that very kind of. And I know this was a time. This is Tennant's 5th episode, right? He's still working out who his Doctor is, and we're still learning who his Doctor is. So there's that kind of sense of, oh, maybe you've gone a bit too far here.
Well, Moffat's never been great. I mean, I think it works for the Doctor I think it works as a scene. It doesn't work with robots as opponents, and this is one of Moffat's weaknesses, which I think I'm just sort of thinking out loud about, which is that he doesn't write robots very well, or he doesn't write villains logically. They don't act logically. Like, 'cause that's why he's never been very good at writing Cybermen or Daleks, or thinking about how, like, what would a robot that probably, it's pretty clear they don't have emotions, that they're robots, that they're just going through programming. What would they do in a certain moment? And a drunk guy walks in, why would they give him the floor at all, right? Like, it's like, what are you doing, unless he's somehow giving them information they need, and that's not clear. So they're just kind of standing there in the way humans would. Like, this guy's here, and I'm like, now it's a weird new situation. I should just listen to him. Whereas there's no reason for him to think robots would react that way.
Well, my headcanon on this, I'm just thinking about it now. I think my headcanon on this is that acting in an unusual way makes them want to scan him for good body parts.
Right.
Because that is what they're after all. Speaking of robots that don't make sense, this whole episode is predicated on basically a Shaggy Dog story about robots who misunderstood the name of their ship, punched a hole in time with massive amounts of energy to get the original owner of the name of their ship, and to insert her brain physically into the console of the ship. Which reminds me, have you seen the mini webisode that came in 2020 that Moffat added for sort of the lockdown rewatch of this? It's just called Pompadour, and it is, they use entirely clips from the episode, but it is new dialogue spoken by Sophia as Madame de Pompadour, talking about how Versailles is strangely silent now since you've gone, Doctor. And, I remember you telling me that the robots were going to scan me, and perhaps they were going to insert my memories into the ship somehow, and they might back up a digital copy, and that person would be so lonely. And why am I so lonely, Doctor? And, it slowly cuts to this one new scene that they filmed for it, which is supposedly the console of the ship, right? So it's clear that this is, a version of Madame de Pompadour who was digitally inserted into the ship and is now there for all time.
Wow, like they copied her consciousness and they didn't use the brain itself. Got it. Wow, I had. How did I miss this? I had no idea this existed. I got to go check it out.
Yeah, it's recent. It's beginning of the pandemic, so it's I don't fault anyone for not noticing anything in the last 2 years, because we are still in March 2020 after all.
But to your point about this is a story, the motivation for the robots is something grotesquely contorted, both in the story and in analyzing the story, is well taken. Again, for some reason it works. I mean, it's not satisfying in the way that like a diabolical plot being unraveled would be, and sort of answering a big question. But for some reason, that final little almost coda bit of seeing the exterior of the space station and the
Yeah.
name come up, and you're just like, oh, I get it. It's one of those. It's not quite M. Night Shyamalan, but it's like it's kind of in the same vein.
It's a satisfying click in the brain as the whole story clicks into place, like a neat little clockwork mechanism.
There you go.
Yes. I mean, the job of any good Who writer is to make you ignore the massive weirdness and plot holes that would have had to have been filled for this thing to actually happen in reality, right? So,
yeah.
Moffat is good at that, and he's better than you might think watching this episode, because watching this episode, you might think, why is that horse on a 51st century spaceship?
Right.
And maybe you can go off and create your own headcanon as to that. But there was a deleted scene.
Yeah.
Right? You want to tell us about the deleted scene? I think it was the horse master was known as like Cholera Guy or something.
Yeah, there was I'm not sure what it was known as, but apparently it was. I haven't seen it. I don't know if it's on the DVD or not. I didn't look enough, but I did read about it. So that the scene where the doctor eavesdrops on Renette and her friend outdoors. Apparently, there was an adjunct to that scene where the stable master comes by and basically is like, "Where's that horse?" He's really mean, and he's just like, "I'm going to whip that horse within an inch of its life," and sort of justifying a little bit the doctor, quote unquote, keeping the horse. And sort of keeping it out of pre-revolutionary France, which is fine. And it speaks to a little bit like, again, I think if you're thinking about what happened to the horse by the end of this episode, you're a little bit like, or why did the doctor think he could keep it? I think you're probably missing the point. So I think it was a good cut. And it speaks to sort of a point, I guess, I think in Moffat's writing career, at least for the show, where he might have overwrote a little bit here and there. And there's actually one other element of the story. I'm not sure. I don't think they filmed it, but it originally they were going to write it so that the thing that makes her brain ready for the robots is the mind meld. Once that happens, then it's like, oh, now her brain's baked. They obviously didn't go with that, and partly I think because they wanted her older and they wanted more windows on her timeline, but also like it's one thing too many that the thing that the plot hinges around, and it really wasn't necessary. So they're haywire. They think they need her brain. That's really all you want.
And that they have to wait till she's the exact same age as the ship itself.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, which is nice because it introduced that element of uncertainty. It's like, she has to be 37 and some number of days. We don't know the number of days. So I like that. But I also would have liked a version where the Doctor is somehow responsible for all of this in the first place, sort of thereby increasing the timey-wiminess of it all and kind of increasing this. It's always very interesting when you think, well, the Doctor is going through time, causing as many problems as he solves.
Well, it would also explain why he doesn't do it much. If it is one of these things where he's leaving too much of his own imprint somewhere, it would be like, oh, what? That's sort of going over the line. Like, I like how New Who does this quite a bit, even if you think about the fuel for the Daleks that they kind of retcon, that it's like if you've traveled through time, you can sort of power them in a weird way, which was a neat little thing they put in the first series, and they kind of forgot about. But it's okay. But it is one of those things that sort of shows, like, oh, the Doctor actually is the catalyst a lot of the times for trouble being afoot.
And speaking of catalysts, I think this episode was in itself a catalyst, perhaps, or at least a blueprint for what New Who was going to be like.
Right.
And it's super interesting watching it now, instead of coming straight from School Reunion, which was our first Tennant episode, oddly enough, and now we're here in the next episode. Had we watched it that way around, we'd probably be doing a lot of commenting on the fact that, Rose and Mickey's relationship seems to have improved dramatically in the 5 seconds they were off screen. But no, we don't care about that. But what we do see, looking backwards, is a lot of the template for New Who, because, and a lot of the template for the Moffat era, because Renette is very much Amy Pond. She's very much the girl who waited. Mm-hmm. It's you can almost see how Moffat stole from himself for the 11th hour here. He's just recycling ideas. I don't know if that makes this look worse or the 11th hour look worse, but
Right.
But that's a fascinating thing. He also admits that he was influenced by the time traveler's wife.
Yeah,
in the
it's a
actual
pretty
writing
obvious
of this.
influence. You can see it.
Which is, clearly also an influence on River Song. Another reason why it's interesting that we came straight from Silence of the Library, Forest of the Dead.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Well, I will say,
and-
in Moffat's defense on some of this, is that the idea of time being nearly instantaneous for one person and long for another person is, it's kind of an obvious place to go with almost any time travel story. And Davies
Sure.
himself did it with the World War III, and I forget the first part of that one, but basically
Aliens of London.
yeah, like when Rose, which I really liked, like Rose, he just sort of casually has Rose come back a year later, and then, but actually deals with the real consequences of that, which was quite good.
Yeah. RTD is like sort of 80% interested in fun timey-wimey stuff that had never been done before, oddly, in the entire history of Classic Who. But Moffat really goes hell for leather in filling in all the gaps of all the possible time travel stories, right?
Yeah.
With perhaps, Chibnall bringing up the rear with Eve of the Daleks, which is something that we hadn't quite seen before, the classic time loop episode that we see in so much. But yeah, anyway, to get back to this as a blueprint, it's also got the blueprint of the lonely god aspect of the Doctor.
Mm-hmm.
The sort of slightly more romantic aspect that would start to play out with Rose, and then with, with Martha, and then with Clara, with Amy for a little bit, and then with Clara. So it's a blueprint for a lot of that. So it's sort of interesting coming back, rewatching it now. It seemed so remarkable at the time. It kind of just seems less remarkable now. It just seems like a kind of, definitely in the top 10% of New Who episodes. But having watched all the subsequent stuff that flowed from it, from the success of this idea, looks perhaps a little bit diminished. I don't know. What do you think?
Almost like I probably see it. I wouldn't say diminished. I don't think that's quite the right word, because I get what you're saying, and I would use as an analogy James Bond movies, where they became formulaic. They kind of are formulaic, but when you see the original formula, so I feel like when James Bond, the formula got established with like Goldfinger. In my mind, like that's where a lot of the tropes of bigger than life villains, diabolical plots, various other things. I mean, there were other sort of like stuff gestating in a couple movies before that, but when you go back and watch Goldfinger, I don't know, you can appreciate it, but at the same time, sort of recognize that this is when all this stuff was new and interesting and original. And maybe
like
you're right.
that.
It's a little bit like you can't go home again because you can't replicate those same feelings you had. Because I hear what you're saying, because you can't have the same reaction. Like we were all kind of agape about how cool this was when it happened, and now we're like, oh yeah, I remember feeling that way. But now that it's been repeated so many times and done again and again.
And it's maybe more that way than a lot of the early Moffat stuff. Like I feel like Empty Child, The Doctor Dances still holds up in a different way. And certainly, as we saw last time, Silence of the Library, Forest of the Dead really holds up. Yeah. Speaking of replicating lines, we dealt with the replicating line with Donna and Rose, right? Where Donna goes a little bit further.
We haven't discussed it, but I definitely want to.
Let's talk about that.
I really like... See, like this is the randomizer was not random at all, and this is the line that emphasizes it, because in both times the Doctor says, "I'm always all right." Obviously, I think Moffat was very knowingly repeating the line and giving a different take. And it did seeing Rose this time. I mean, I don't want to diminish Billie Piper and the cool stuff they were doing with her character's relationship with the Doctor. I think all of that was solid, but you got with Donna and Catherine Tate, I just feel like the way they played out that line with her response, which if you don't remember, basically he says, "I'm always all right." She counters with, "Is that special Time Lord talk for not really being all right at all?" And then he kind of looks at her and sort of like, "Why?" And she says, "Well, because I'm all right too." Yeah. And I felt like moment. That it's such a mature, gentle way to deepen their bond. You know, like
Yeah.
in other words, Donna's response is better than Rose's. It's a true friend response,
Yeah.
and it really I think it speaks to a lot of what a lot of people think, which is that Donna, in terms of New Who, might be the best companion, and is people regard her as like the best one of the new era, and it's because of those moments. She's not just there for the ride; she really sees the Doctor as a true friend and equal, and
a romantic who suffers just like her.
yeah, totally. Because think about her response, and like you could be a jerk about it and call him out a little bit on like, oh, you're not, you're just saying you're all right. You're not really all right. But she does it in such a way that actually lets him know it's okay to let down your guard.
Yeah. No, that's a true companion. And yeah, this is sort of why the Doctor's interest in Rose always, I like the romance. I like, it kind of, it works eventually, right? But it just sort of like, Rose is not that perceptive in a lot of ways. Like of the Doctor's emotion, you'd think that he would go for someone with a bit more of a mature emotional perception, but who knows? I mean, maybe you could argue the Doctor as a child in that sense as well. Like, he hasn't done a lot of exploration of his emotions and his journeys. He's pushed it away by going out and helping other people.
Yeah,
right?
And I think the Rose thing works, but I think it works in the context of, the era, right? Which was like, this is very fresh. He's last of the Time Lords. Yeah. He's supposed to be a very wounded Doctor emotionally, and you could argue whether that was really successfully portrayed in those seasons. I mean, it's obviously different writers, and they're also trying to be episodic and be true to the show. So there are times where he seems really dark and mooded, and there are times when he's just sort of happy-go-lucky. So, but I do think her character, even though there's you might argue she's kind of immature and 19, I think the fact that she was there for him during that era, you can kind of like understand why he would have such a deep bond with someone, because he really needed it.
He did, and she was there, and she's, obviously, spunky and helpful and easy on the eye, and all these things that one might think would attract us if we were in that sort of emotionally wounded situation.
And if I could quote another different sci-fi show, she's just at the beginning of the adventure.
Yes, indeed.
I don't know if you know that one. That's
I don't.
That's actually a line from Star Trek: The Next Generation, and it's a line that Captain Picard says to Wesley Crusher at some point in, I think, one of his last appearances on the show.
Good one.
He envies Wesley because he's just at the beginning of the adventure.
Shout out to our TNG peeps.
Yep.
Love it.
I always love it when I bring up Klingons.
Speaking of the ending, I have literally just thought of some headcanon on why the Doctor can't go back to see Madame de Pompadour.
Go. Real
in
time.
the TARDIS.
Headcanon.
Yes.
The new
he is. We see him standing in the TARDIS reading her letter. Right, in which she says, she's based the letters like, why didn't you come? Why aren't you here? I'm very sick. That letter itself creates the fixed point in time. Mm-hmm. And he waits to read it, like he takes the letter from Louis XV, which, by the way, the Doctor, super dismissive of Louis XV all episode. Oh, you're the King of France? I'm the Lord of Time. Little jealous, perhaps, Doctor? You'd like hanging out with historical figures, don't you? Unless they happen to be sleeping with a historical figure that you like. Anyway.
Unless they're dudes. This particular incarnation, less interested in the dudes.
Yeah, that would change. But, that's why he takes the letter and he goes back to the TARDIS. Does not read it in front of the king, does not read it anywhere in the Palace of Farce. Is standing in the TARDIS because I think he thinks in his own head, if he opens the letter and it's just sort of general non-specific stuff that would sort of allow for a loophole where he could use the TARDIS, he would do that. But that's why he looks so devastated when he's reading the letter in the TARDIS, because he knows now, and the TARDIS also knows now, that she's a fixed point in time. That letter would be a paradox. The letter would vanish. It would just, like if he went back at any point at all to see her now. So the letter itself is the fixed point in time. Yeah, I like that headcanon.
It makes me think. I love it. It's a great explanation, and it makes me. I'm probably going to be more hyper conscious now of when he says when time can be rewritten, which he did say in our last stop in Forest of the Dead. Was that the first time? And this is basically me asking the listeners for an audit of the times the Doctor has said time can be rewritten in New Who. And I know the rules for that have been inconsistent, but
please retcon us.
Yeah,
write in and retcon.
And I think it's interesting. It might be an interesting exploration sometime on like when. Well, what are the rules? How have they changed? Because they clearly change in this era too, right? Because they're fairly consistent. And this is the thing. There's a hand wave in the episode, and it's the same hand wave you get in any Doctor Who episode. So you can't. It's not a call out at all. It's just that they're like, why don't we use the TARDIS to go back to the palace because the time windows, for whatever reason, we can't get through because the robots have jammed them. And it's like, well, we can't do that because we're part of events. And it's just
part of events.
Okay,
okay, we're part of events. When are you not part of events, Doctor?
Yeah. And the thing is, like, time travel stories, they don't work for this reason. Because why can't you just keep if you theoretically had time travel, you could literally do anything. So you need to have some rules of the road. But this is the consistent rule of the road for Doctor Who generally. And again, it is like you do it when you need to and you don't. You can't when you don't. But it does kind of make some kind of sense in that, like,
maybe he should have just turned to Rose and raised his eyebrows and go, "Remember Father's Day?"
Yeah, well, that's the. I'm glad you got ahead of me because it's like that's kind of like there's probably more than one time, but there's certainly that is the most overt time where they completely ignored the rule and just kind of saw what happened. And that said, they sort of show the consequences of that when you forget the bleeding eventual limitation effect or whatever. Well, basically, time monsters come and just eat time.
Yes, and that would really put a crimp in his travels with Madame de Pompadour.
Yeah,
perhaps the best TARDIS companion who never was.
Right.
Yeah, that would have been a fantastic. And I think that's part of what you think. I mean, you sort of feel like the story's heading that anyway. She's not going to be a future companion or anything like that. But
it's fun. But
it's fun to think about, and you sort of, for that scene to work, you have to think that it's a possibility. The Doctor does want to take us through time and space. Which, by the way, how would that have worked with Rose? I mean, come on, Doctor, you're just collecting a harem now.
I mean, I wouldn't ask the Tenant Doctor. He's,
you know what? I can see a farce here where he sort of resets up the old backup control room. And he makes them think individually that he's only traveling with them.
So he's like one of these polygamists who's like, yes. Oh my God, that is so funny. That's a
just
great...
go back and forth. Yeah. Alternate adventures. That would actually be great for the show if we could set this up, because then you'd have, one actor would only be filming on, it would reduce the weight on the cast.
Yeah.
Except for whoever's playing the Doctor.
That'd be a fun, elaborate thing. You know what? I'm actually thinking this might make a good mini season or season where they do it, and maybe it's even the same person, just at different points in their time stream. And he's kind of like, it's for him, it's like right now and all the time, and for them, it's like years later. Oh man, Moffat, dude, you got to come back and write this.
Or RTD, I feel like he has the chops to write a sex farce like that. So bring it on in, RTD. Let's make Doctor Who controversial again. All right, so speaking of Madame de Pompadour, also known as Jean Antoinette, I'm going to butcher her name. My apologies to my French teacher, mother and sister, for all of the French I'm about to butcher. But Jean Antoinette Poisson. Her family name was Poisson. How did the Doctor not make a joke of that? She's a fish.
Too many jokes to make already.
I know, but that was her name. She was not actually. She's called Renette throughout, and describes herself as that on first meeting with the Doctor.
Right.
That was actually historically inaccurate. So. Let's talk about the real Madame de Pompadour. I will go forward through her timeline, as the Doctor does. So she was born to... there's actually a bit of a potential scandal over her birth. To just a dude, Francois Poisson.
A
dude. and his wife. But it's suspected that her biological father was some other... fancy financier or possibly a tax collector. Yeah,
she was from Paris, right? She was from Paris?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes. So already mired in scandal. And then at age 9, she goes to a fortune teller, Madame de Lebon,
Okay.
which I'm going to get here a little bit early. I think that Madame de Lebon may actually be the Clara splinter.
Oh, wow.
Because
Okay.
the fortune teller predicted that the girl would one day reign over the heart of a king.
Oh, my. Wow.
I like this.
Who were they talking about?
Exactly. I like this as the idea of a Clara splinter because I like to think that what the fortune teller actually said was hearts, plural. But maybe her French wasn't great, so she couldn't figure out the plural.
Right. The whole thing about her name, like she was 8 in the show, right? That's the inaccuracy.
Yes. So that's the inaccuracy because she only got that name Renette, meaning little queen.
Right. Because after the fortune teller, got it. Yeah, that makes sense. So, like, I forgot that. Yeah, Renette. Okay.
So, from that age, just as you could uncomfortably suggest that she was being groomed by the Doctor, she was in fact being groomed by her parents to be the mistress of Louis XV.
Wow. From the age of 9.
Yes, and she does, in fact, as the show suggests, at the Yew Tree Ball, she does, in fact, meet the king. She'd met him before that, like basically went on a hunt with him and was supposed to stick at the back, but rode a horse out boldly in front of the king to catch his attention. And then she shows up at the ball dressed as Diana, the hunter goddess, right, to reference that instant. And it's this whole deep seduction that she was into. She was super smart about the way she went about it. Yeah. And so she made an alliance with the queen, basically. The show is right about that. She became a lady in waiting to the queen, which is as high as you could go and still be a woman in the French court, but it was still a very powerful position, being the king's sort of officially sanctioned mistress. And in that position, she basically became the prime minister of France. She was choosing a lot of the ministers. And the ministers that she chose had huge historical importance on the direction that France took. I mean, she sort of has been credited with revitalizing the economy, but also France made an alliance with Austria. Don't worry, I'm not going to get too deep into history, even though I am a history nerd. France made this alliance with Austria, which led to the 7 Years' War, which led to France losing its North American colonies, a lot of them, to Britain, and Canadian colonies.
Right. Well, Britain at the time.
Yes. And arguably, you could say that the modern United States, the modern Canada, would look different, may not even exist without Madame de Pompadour's unknowing intervention in this matter.
And by extension, Clara's intervention.
Yes.
She named her Renette or then gave her the inspiration to do that. That's way to go, Clara.
Another interesting, fun historical fact about Madame de Pompadour: she did give her name to the Pompadour hairstyle, but it's actually a historical misnomer because she never wore her hair up.
See, I was wondering that about this because she never has really a pompadour. I mean, she combs her hair back, but that's not what a pompadour is, right? So, I thought they kind of missed an opportunity there, but I guess it's actually historically accurate is what you're telling me, that she never actually wore her hair that way. Yeah,
the hairstyle precedes her and postcedes her. But she herself always wore her hair down. So well done, Doctor Who, for that inaccuracy. Well, they get the age of her death.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm just going to finish this off, but just to say that she died age 42, not 43 in the show, which is one of the weirdest little historical inaccuracies. Also, come on, 42 is right there. Well, maybe that's why he had to change it.
A minute or two on the space station, which apparently is a lot of time in the real world. So maybe her personal time was 43. Let's go with that.
The Doctor corrects the historical record. Yes.
Yeah, I want to make sure these are all retconned and explained. So the 9-year-old thing, I think it's only the Doctor's read that she's 8. So maybe she was really 9.
Yeah.
In that for initial Fireplace meeting. Though they do probably time it a little bit. I forget if they say the year, but she does say it's months later. So there's that one. And everything else seems to check out, though.
Yeah, it really does. So it's bravo, Doctor Who, for getting us interested in an actual historical character are really showing us that for once in a way that the show, barring the occasional appearance of Churchill and, guest stars playing, James the First, et cetera, it just sort of doesn't kind of get into it this deeply with a historical figure. So hats off to them with that.
They went out of their way to make it really accurate, and even some of the details in the sets. I mean, I got to say, like a lot of the style of what they did with how they made it at least look like France, and even the pan down from the stars at the beginning, and they do it again with the space station. There's a lot of that of like they're all looking up at the same stars, even toward the end when the Doctor's seemingly trapped. I thought all of that was, just really nice. Like a lot of attention to detail in this episode. You just went over the historical detail, but they really, I think they knew they had a corker and were like, let's really go for it. And one of the things we talked about with effects, obviously done cheaply, there was the big rescue scene with the horse coming
the horse
through,
bursting through the mirror.
Yeah, that almost didn't get filmed. Apparently,
because surprisingly, they don't allow horses in stately homes in Britain. Certainly don't allow them to smash through mirrors.
When I read about that, I actually heard about it through the commentary, and it always stuns me. Like, come on, it's TV. Like, isn't that like your free pass to do anything? We're like, let us do the horse in here. It's a TV show, man. But apparently they had a lot of difficulty. They had to do green screen. They had to have Tennant on not just a horse, but also like a weird high tricycle thing. And there's like so many shots that they did to make that happen. I'm glad they did because it's just so climactic. It's just like, wow, like you just burst right through. It's so clearly an effect, but it is like you're so right with the heroic moment that you're basically like, yeah, man, go for it.
It's very good editing, because I think you only really notice on a rewatch that it is chroma keyed, to use the technical term, that the Doctor is sort of chroma keyed in there in a sort of way that you would definitely fix in post with better CGI today. But it cuts away from that climactic scene so quickly that your eye barely has time to register that it's an effect.
Yeah, and when there's that close up on Tennant winking at Renette, he's actually on a weird mechanism he's being pushed around the room, not a horse. But they pulled it off. It's such a great
weirdly, it's weirdly more compelling than Capaldi on horseback, which I think was actually a real horse in Deep Breath,
right?
Which this episode shares another connection with. Deep Breath, of course, is when the Clockwork Robots returned.
Yeah,
from a sister ship.
Yeah, which was an interesting choice. Again, Moffat recycling. Not that anyone was dying to see them again, but I will give them like points on the design of those guys is really cool.
It's so good.
I would love to have like just one of them as a sort of a souvenir prop. If I don't know if they're probably either dismantled or in other fans' places, or maybe David Tennant has one, but that would be like. If I had like one of my choice, I almost want that more than a Dalek because it's just so unique.
It really is, especially if it could move. It would be such a great animatronic thing.
Yeah, it could wind it up.
Collectors would pay beaucoup bucks for that. And it's sort of interesting that it does. It's one of the few monsters where the Doctor actually compliments how beautiful the monster looks. Right? Yeah. I mean, first of all, we should say the masks still hold up.
Yes.
They're still super creepy. Carnival masks, you can't go wrong making them creepy with powder wigs on top.
Well, I watched this one with my 8-year-old daughter, actually.
Yeah.
She was excited to watch it. I remember it not being as scary as Force of the Dead. She found it way scarier. She almost had to leave the room, but, she just snuggled into me. But it was, in hindsight, I was like, I was almost slapping my head, of course. There's a scene with a monster under the bed of an 8-year-old girl. It's like,
yes, and that whole scene has the clock ticking effect, which is just perfect. Suspense building, Moffat writing.
So good.
I love that scene because he really builds up the thing of like, if that clock is broken, then what's that sound? And it gives you that delicious sort of the call is coming from inside the house, chill down the spine.
Well, and I love that as a signature thing that they break the clocks because they make clock noises. And I if they ever do use them again, that should be the reveal, right? Like
Mm.
that they're somewhere, and then what's going on here, and then it's a broken clock. Like, what does that mean? And the doctor would be like, "Oh no!" And it's just boom, here they come.
I also like that the Doctor sort of says it is sort of such an aesthetically beautiful object, this monster,
Yeah.
that he almost feels bad about destroying it, but that's not going to stop him.
Yeah.
Which I think wonderfully shows, really deepens the character of the Doctor, really shows his two sides there. You know, he's a romantic, he believes in the aesthetic beauty of a lot of things, not perhaps not the rubber-suited variety, perhaps not Zygons, but definitely Clockwork Monsters.
Yeah, I mean, he always has to do the right thing. One more thing about the monsters, and I think this is a good testament to the writing of like why they're really creepy, but they never do anything that physically imposing or horrific, right? Like they have the early scene with the bedroom. You do see the robots get as physical as they get in this episode, and which is the guy swings at the Doctor a bunch of times and eventually embeds his blade in the fireplace. So that's sort of letting the Doctor trap him, but they're never quite that physical again. They never quite get that threatening, but that's enough. That combined with the organs powering the space station gives you enough to like, you don't actually need them to do anything again. Like, you're scared.
It is interesting that, yes, people die off screen before the episode starts. Right, on the Madame de Pompadour ship. 17 crew members, was it? It's, and it is
I forget what
quite grisly in those scenes. But a lot of people die. But nobody actually, am I correct in this? Nobody actually dies except of natural causes in the episode, except Renette dying at the end.
Yeah, I think you're right. Come to think of it, the robots never really kill anybody.
Yeah. So just as in Silence of the Library and Empty Child, the Doctor Dances, it's almost a case of nobody dies, or nobody dies who didn't have to die.
Yeah. One thing that also they did, so just because it's occurring to me as we talk about clocks and the robots in that scene, David Tennant, he talked about in the commentary how the loose connection in the fireplace, restoring the one time window for him to get back, was a bit of a fudge for him, and he kind of didn't quite get it, but he went along with it. And I got to say, I've been listening to commentaries that I hadn't before as we've done these episodes, and every time I listen to a David Tennant commentary, it convinces me he's a stickler for these details and a stickler for things making sense, which I think is great. Like he once, I think when we talked about, what was it, the Wire episode, where he gets his coat on at the end because it looks cool for the scene where he's on the tower.
Right, the Idiot's Lantern.
Lantern, that was it. But in the commentary, he reveals, like, why would he do that, though? Like, he doesn't need the coat. And it's like, well, then he sort of justified it in his mind. Like, well, he's carrying a bunch of things and the coat has pockets. So that's going to help him carry more things. So this got me thinking this time, because I've seen it so many times and now it's really convinced me he's a stickler. How interesting it would have been to have seen a season of David Tennant and Stephen Moffat, which was actually considered for a little bit before he made the final decision to leave the show, and they cast Matt Smith for Series 5. Because there could have been an alternate season where it's David Tennant's last with Amy Pond and, again, with preserving a lot of the timey-wimey stuff. But I do feel like once Moffat was showrunner, he got away with a lot more, or let himself get away with a lot more of hand-waviness of things.
It is interesting.
But if Tennant
was very interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting to consider what an alternate version of the 11th Hour, well, it's not called the 11th Hour, but it's, Tennant's new season with Amy Pond would look like. Would it almost look like the show backtracking? Because we would have just come from Donna, who, was his I just want a mate, companion, to another sort of romantic interest for Tennant's Doctor. I think there might have been more rolling of eyes kind of than there was for Matt Smith. Also just would have just been too obvious a repeat of the girl in the fireplace. You couldn't recycle that plot, so you would have had to have looked elsewhere.
I like the universe we're in. Definitely. I don't know if we needed a season 5 of David Tennant's run, but it does make me wonder a little bit about who was keeping Moffat honest in later years, because when he had Davies and I think to some extent Tennant here to call out his scripts on like, wait a minute, does this make sense or doesn't it? Do we need a line? Do we need another layer to this to make sure it works? He probably had fewer of those filters later, and I think he's well served by them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
for sure. Can I just throw in one more thing about Madame de Pompadour?
Please.
So it plays into a lot of what we were talking about the start of the episode about the question of the doctor's sexual relationship with her. So Madame de Pompadour actually stopped being the mistress of the king in 1750.
Oh, wow.
Which is quite early. She died in 1764. So the last 14 years. Yeah. And it was in part attributed to her poor health. She had whooping cough, colds, bronchitis. She had 3 miscarriages.
Wow.
To the king, and many other potential, ailments. She tried to increase her libido with truffles, celery, and vanilla,
as one does.
As you do. We've all tried. We've all seen that remedy on the cover of Cosmo, and admitted that she had the misfortune to be of a very cold temperament. That's right, she was a cold fish. But she, from that point on, Madame de Poisson, became known as the friend of the king and was still sort of, had a close friendship with the king. Now, you could read this one or two ways when you connect it to the girl in the fireplace. Either she was so in love with the doctor that she sort of made up this reason why she couldn't sleep with the king anymore. And that kind of makes the girl in the fireplace even more romantic. Like, I
love it.
She wanted to save herself.
It's a history
right? But also, you could read that as this is why the doctor and Madame de Pompadour did not actually have a sexual relationship, because she couldn't.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Covers a lot of bases.
By the time. Do you think, by the way, that they had chemistry because Sophia and David Tennant dated for a little while, like about a year after this episode? Did you know that?
I did, yeah. In fact, sometimes I get confused about which of the guest stars he married.
Right. He married the one who played his daughter, Peter. I would have thought that'd be, yeah.
I do, yes, I've been corrected. But I thought it worked.
It's hard to forget that. Yeah,
I thought they had chemistry. I thought it was, it really worked. And I think it has a lot to do with both of them really giving it their all, and Tennant really thinking about those details. I mean, and I think probably he thought about those details because he was like, wow, like this girl's hot, like I've got to turn to. But there was a scene that, according to the commentary anyway, that it was David Tennant's choice. Was he had his glasses on in character when he was in when the first time he sees her as an adult, and then when she walks in, he pulls them off just like that. And for those listening, Chris has just pulled off his glasses. And
I just did the sexy librarian thing of pulling off the glasses and shaking the hair. But yes,
it was, it's the thing of like when you encounter someone you really are attracted to, you'd be like, oh wow, now of course I'm wearing my glasses, right? When I, so he sort of whips them off, and playing up those sort of sexy moments, or those attraction moments rather, right from the get-go, which I think was a great choice. And I was convinced. What did you think?
I like to think that he got her to go out by saying, I'm a method actor, let's grab a drink. But oddly, I didn't. I was surprised when I discovered that they dated. I couldn't necessarily see it, which I think sort of adheres to this general rule that chemistry on screen and chemistry off screen are, inversely connected, right? Mm-hmm. You either have one or you have the other, and they didn't necessarily. I mean, they sold it to me, but I definitely thought that they were acting.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Did you think he has more chemistry with Rose?
Yeah, I think he does, because they have time. They have time to build it up, right? So when I think about the Doctor's relationship with Rose, I'm thinking about multiple episodes, multiple moments. And actually, I think they sold that more because the way Billie Piper always looks at him, like it's much more selling it on her side.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. It's almost like when he's smiling at her, he's smiling at the reflection of him in her eyes.
Well, and she brings her A game a lot. I got to say,
Yeah.
I haven't talked enough about the dialogue in this. I mean, it's Moffat, so it's almost a given. There's lots of clever dialogue, but one of the best lines is it's actually Rose and the Doctor, but Rose, I think Billy Piper gives her best line here, which is, "You're not keeping the horse." And he's like, "I let you keep Mickey." Like it's such a great punchline. It had like I was watching this not just my 8-year-old daughter, but my whole family. It just had us all cracking up, that line again. Like so good.
Speaking of lines, though, you're Mr. Thickety Thickface from Thicktown, Thickania.
Too much
is maybe a step too far in the Doctor's impersonation of a drunk person when he's talking to the robots, and then he adds, "And so's your dad," referring to another robot. Yeah, just that doesn't quite land as well. But yes, the dialogue that you're talking about is brilliant. There's some great lines like we're on a spaceship. Have some, there are time windows over to France. Have some perspective.
Yeah.
Mickey.
What's pre-revolutionary France doing on a spaceship?
Yeah.
Like when he asks about the horse. And
there is also one line of dialogue we should mention that would not be inserted in Doctor Who today because of the fact that it is very consciously for a transatlantic audience. Rose would most definitely not say that the crew members on the ship might have just gone out for a fag.
Which might confuse some people in the US. I did know what a fag is in British context. So, but I also think
it's a cigarette, people.
I like, again, the Doctor Who can be educational. I think it's very clear from what she's saying. Like, obviously, she's not talking about like what an American might think that word means. And you kind of like, oh, what is that? And it might, get some people to sort of figure out on their own what that is. I really, maybe this is just me because I've grown up with the show, but you kind of have to be into Britain and Britishisms to really like get the most out of Doctor Who and appreciate it. So I think I actually really like it when Rose goes full on, working class.
Chav.
Yeah, chav. I didn't want to say it because I don't know how offensive it is, but it's like I do remember it's such a great line. And
oh my God, I'm a chav. Yes,
but one just to close the book on the dialogue, there's one line that I think really hits home for a British audience. Actually, but it hits home for a global audience because how could you not know who Camilla is? Because she says Camilla at one point when she's talking about when the Doctor's telling her who Madame de Pompadour is the mistress, and she's like, "Oh, Camilla," and it's funny. I mean, it's good. It's modern. I don't know if you would write it today. I feel like sensibilities are a little different in 2022.
That was one of the first things that when she said that. I turned to my wife who was watching this, because again, folks, we bonded and connected and really started our relationship with Doctor Who. This being one of the episodes that I showed her first time she came to stay at my house. We turned to each other at the Camilla line of dialogue and said, "Yeah, that dates it," because Camilla's accepted now.
Right.
She is the whatever her title is, Duchess of. Whatever, not Princess of Wales. Anyway, been out of the UK too long to remember exact titles. But she's on the inside now.
She's on the inside of the royal family. I get it, but I also feel like that sort of needling. I don't know. There's a sort of needling of their aristocracy there that again I think is. Anyway, I don't want me to fully unpack the politics of the line. I think it's actually a clever line.
It is,
and I think it's also so Rose. Like it's like as a person who's gossipy and sort of every day about the royal family, I feel like that's exactly what she would say. And again, Billy Piper, this is one of the best things about how that character was written and Billy Piper's performance. I mean, she was so real, right? I mean, this is what my wife always says this when we go back and watch these episodes, which I had watched with her previously. She's like, "Oh, I just love those early Doctor Who's." From this era because everyone just seems so much more real than the characters in the current run that depending on your taste, but it is and I think a lot of it is Billy Piper here, who's just she's super like she's relatable.
Yeah, the companion is always kind of there to translate for the audience, right? And we often get awfully close to breaking the fourth wall on that, like, Leela in Tongues of Wen Chiang, which is like, oh, I'm just supposed to nod and listen and I'm just the old bouncing wall for this information. But Rose really nails the role, and you can almost see her taking a delight in nailing the role by just like, oh, I can explain this historical situation in one word.
Yeah.
Camilla.
Have a little bit of fun with
and she takes a kind of there's a glee on her face when she says that. So it was Doctor Who returning after 2005, and really setting out its stall to say we are a show for everyone. Even the Mr. Thickety Thickface who doesn't know anything about history, you can still watch because we're going to translate into modern day references for you.
Yeah. No.
And so well done,
Definitely
well
good
done
message.
To all involved, RTD and Moffat, and of course the amazing, estimable Billy Piper.
So is it time? Is it time to ask ourselves, what if the evil plot had succeeded here?
Well, let's take a brief diversion before we get this kind of on the way to the evil plot, because the evil plot, of course, takes place in the 51st century.
Right.
And have you noticed, as I have been throughout our adventure, the randomizer really seems to love the 50th and 51st centuries.
Well,
Doctor Who in general does those particular centuries almost as much as the 20th and the 21st, you might say.
Yeah, they've really zeroed in on it. The Jack Harkness and River Song come from this era.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This is in this era.
That's why it's so freaky. We came here from Silence of the Library, right?
Yeah.
That was the 50th century.
Yeah, it's all... I think I like that about Doctor Who, that it sort of zeroes in on a couple of... Well, not a couple, several different eras of the future and sort of tries to flesh them out a bit, or maybe inadvertently connects things because they just sort of happen to have a good shorthand. It sort of lays lays the groundwork for fan theories on whether, say Jack and River are contemporaries. Do they have adventures together? So I think that's fine. I kind of just...
We should throw in K9, by the way.
That's right.
School reunion. The Doctor's just hung out with K9, and he doesn't even remember that this is the era that K9 comes from. How quickly he forgets.
Yeah, and I feel like when Doctor Who goes into the far, far future, whether they talk about millions or billions or even trillions of years, it stretches a certain amount of your brain's credulity to think that the universe would even resemble what we have today, when with people still being people and ships just still being like, you kind of like, once you get so far out, that's why I think in series 1, I think they did a little overkill with the Daleks being, I think they said it was like 200,000 years in the future or something. It was some ridiculous amount, which is like, okay, fair enough. But it's also like, you didn't have to bat, you only need a double here, guys. You don't need to go for the swing for the bleachers.
Right. Utopia is sort of the ultimate example of that, isn't it? And obviously we'll get there.
Yeah, they kind of overshoot. So yeah, I mean, 51st century, I mean, why not?
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I kind of like it. I kind of want to read I don't know if this has ever been written, but a guide to the 50th and 51st centuries would be a great Doctor Who book. Just to zero in on all of the connections the Doctor has to that timeline and trying to tie them all together.
Surely you have your own copy of A History.
A History.
Yes, A History. The complete timeline, the complete history of the Doctor Who universe in 3 volumes.
Oh my God! No, I don't have my copy of this. Obviously, I need to get the. Does the 3rd volume mostly take place in the 50th, 51st century?
Be sure to add that to your Amazon wish list, and perhaps a fan will get it for you. But no, it's actually Lance Parkin and oh God, I'm blanking on the other guy's name, but he's actually been writing this book over and over and over. And the first one is sort of this very small tome. It came out, I think, in the early 2000s or late 90s. Since then, it's been revised 3 times. So this is the 4th edition, which goes all the way to the end of the 12th Doctor's era. And it literally does the exercise of when in the universe's history does every episode take place and how do they relate to each other. And so, as you might imagine, the modern era, like the present, which is from when the show first premiered, in the show in 63 to today, whenever that is when the book's published, is the most complicated. But yeah, they do have like they do make the connections between a lot of these eras in it.
I'm glad it comes out in separate volumes, and I'm going to suggest to the author that he might want to bring out just a separate 50th, 51st century guide, because that seems manageable. The idea of just reading about the entire timeline of Doctor Who kind of gives me the screaming heebie-jeebies.
It's shockingly readable, and I love all of the theories that they put in because it's mostly the footnotes that you want to read, because it's like, why did we choose this particular date if, for example, the date isn't given? And if it's just a general date, why is it in relation before this other story or after this other story? And what are some notes on the dating? Like, for example, why the hell is River Song even going in reverse order with the Doctor and things like, going, there's good thoughts about all of that. So it's definitely would recommend for me.
I will check that out and see if I can literally check it out at my local library. But yeah, another quick detour to what if the evil plot had succeeded.
Yeah.
The Doctor mentions since the evil plot is conducted by the clockwork robots, or the Doctor at one point calls them droids.
He does.
And so maybe I would like to ask our audience if they can tell us, is that the first reference to droids in Doctor Who? Perhaps, Pete, you can tell us that, because that is a very Star Wars word.
It is a very Star Wars word. I think it might be. It's like an on-screen droid. There might have been. No, wait a second. Even in New Who, there was the android. Do you remember that?
Yes, in Bad Wolf.
So
Parting of the Ways.
Android, 2 words. And I feel
that's still a clever kind of. You could like that.
Yeah, you can get technical either way. Yeah, I gotta look this up. I feel like maybe they're that robot in The Greatest Show in the Galaxy, the ticket-taking robot, might have been a droid.
Interesting.
But I'll get back to you on it. But if anyone knows, were droids ever mentioned in the classic series? I'd like to know.
Yeah, write in, or tweet at us, TikTok at us. Yeah, do your answer in the form of TikTok dance, please.
Yes.
Show us your favorite droid. Anyway, so their evil and utterly insane, though thoroughly logical from their perspective, scheme is specifically to kidnap Madame Pompadour and insert her brain physically into the ship.
Right.
Although, as we learn in the mini episode, they do it anyway with the downloaded version. So it kind of did succeed in a way to everyone's satisfaction.
Okay, we're done.
Because that's the stakes, right? The stakes is Madame de Pompadour's life.
Well, think about this, though. Like, time's rewritten then, if they actually do succeed, right? Like, if they physically succeed in removing her brain, like, then she doesn't die normally.
Yes.
In whatever, I forget what it was. But,
and then she doesn't realign. Yeah, she doesn't realign France with Austria. The 7 Years' War never happens. The USA never exists. Or at least not in its current form. Wow, clockwork droids.
They just unraveled all of history.
They just unraveled all of American history.
Maybe that becomes
perhaps French as well.
An Amy Rory paradox, where they actually stop themselves from being built because all that stuff doesn't happen. Right? It's like it's a little like City on the Edge of Forever with in Star Trek, where the Enterprise just disappears the second they go back in time, and okay, that's what happened.
So
then someone has to go back and fix it again. Or it just doesn't, or maybe like, I guess what I was getting at with the Amy Rory thing, where they throw themselves out the building and just it all just sort of smooths out. Maybe that would have happened. That it's like, boom, and now everything's okay. We didn't have to do the horse through the window thing at all.
All their blades suddenly go blunt.
Yeah,
all of their little rotating clockwork, threatening things that they're going to slice open her brain with.
So like time itself stops the paradox.
By the way, would they their intent was to slice open her brain like right there on the floors of Versailles, which
But I got the impression,
certainly
yeah, they would
would
either
have been a
chop her
grisly
head off.
scene.
It would have been a little cyber conversion for everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you think they would have actually taken just the brain, or would they have just chopped off her head and then done the more um,
I don't know. Did
the
you
deliberate
notice
work
where
in the
they?
space
Because
station?
there's that moment where they make her kneel on the floor, and it's right before the horse comes through, and like,
Yeah, I felt like they were
they're
going to chop off her head. The
right.
positioning of the blades, anyway, was more closer to her neck. So it's like they were
Okay.
going to behead her, which was very French. and,
It's invincibility.
and then disappear off to the future with it, and then basically rip off everything that was in the brain, hook it up to the computer, and there we go. And it's like it's so sickening to say it out loud and to think about, like, as effed up as their plan is, like it works in the sense that the body parts they connect to the machinery do work in some way, and we see that later even with deep breath. Like, these robots, for whatever reason, are good at cybernetics.
Yeah. Why not just use the brain of the pilot or the captain?
Well, they needed Madame Dupont.
Yeah, they just got way too literal with it. But you'd think that they maybe would have, something in their programming would have said, well, hey, we got like 17 brains right here. Maybe let's try one of them first. You know what? No one programmed these clockwork droids with Asimov's 3 laws of robotics. This is why. And Boston Dynamics, if there's anyone from there listening, please make sure, this is not a drill. Always make sure to program your robots with 3 laws of robotics.
Well, that's a good point. Maybe that's why they're called droids. They're not. If you're a robot, you get that program, and if you're a droid, not so much.
Could be.
Maybe that's the distinction.
So we've gone from the stakes of one person's brain to pretty much
all
the
of
entire the entire of history since the French Revolution.
Wow.
I kind of you got to believe that the French Revolution would still happen, maybe, although that was influenced by the American Revolutions of the 7 Years' War. If the 7 Years' War had not happened, we would not have taxed your guys' tea. Because we bankrupted ourselves with that war, so we needed the money. That's why we had the tax on the tea. That's why the Boston Tea Party. So, yeah.
Doctor, you did it again. Save the universe. Nice work.
This is a very save the cheerleader, save the world kind of moment with Madame de Pompadour.
For sure.
Heroes reference there for everyone.
She's the fixed point in time. Okay.
All right.
Well, it is time. It's time
for time.
Partner, to find out where we are going next.
All right. Want to explain how we do that?
Yes. We have to activate the randomizer, of course, which has 2 key components. The Codex, which provides a guide, a navigation, a map, if you will, of all of Doctor Who as a television series. Every single adventure is cataloged in the Codex. Mm-hmm. There are 299 of them.
We were at 173.
Yeah, we're leaving 173 right now, and obviously number 1 is On an Earthly Child, 299 is Eve of the Daleks, and there's everything in between. And
we're firing up the biscuit dispenser, preparing for TARDIS flight, but also we're going to the Executor, which is random.org.
The second component of the randomizer.
The second component of the randomizer allows us to choose a random number, true random number between 1 and 299, the number of stories in the Codex. And we know that computers don't do that very well, so we go to random.org because they use atmospheric noise, which is very doctorish of them, to generate our true random number. And you can see truly how random it is by the number of stories that bunch up together, like the fact that we did School Reunion a while back, our first tenant, and now we've come back in, what is it, our 3rd or 4th tenant? 5th maybe, to right after. Yeah.
We've actually had 5 so far now.
By the way, do also write in, because we are thinking of having a special episode where we go through all the stories we've been through so far and rank them. And just sort of having a show like that. So let us know your thoughts on your particular rankings, perhaps when you leave us a review. But in the meantime, are you ready, Pete? Do you have
I'm ready with the Codex. It is wide open. We have
ready with random.org.
The new ones and all the time-locked ones here.
Yeah.
Should we challenge the randomizer before we get there?
Yeah, I'm gonna say really, really randomizer. We seriously need to get some Daleks and Cybermen out of the way.
Indeed. We've only had like one. No, we've had 2 Cybermen episodes because we just did Closing Time and we did Dark Water before.
Right, and they're none of them are real, real showcase the monster episodes. There's always something else going on. Like Dark Water was very much Missy stealing the show.
Agreed.
Right.
Agreed.
So you don't necessarily remember it.
There's a lot of Cybermen in it, so I can't say it's definitely not a Cybermen episode.
It's not a Cybermen, but okay, give us one where Cybermen or Daleks are actually in the title, or do Deep Breath and let's just get all the clockwork droids out of the way.
Yeah, it's just shocking we haven't had a Dalek episode yet. I mean, I know they're in a Day of the Doctor, but not a Dalek episode. So yeah, let's do this. Yeah. Let's see some Daleks.
All right, so you're ready? I'm going to hit the generate button. Want to give me a countdown?
I do.
And a wheezing TARDIS noise.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Unstable!
142.
Oh, I think we might be in Old Who. Oh my, Chris. We're at Trial of a Time Lord, The Mysterious Planet.
Oh my god. Okay, which one is that?
That's the first one. That's actually the first part of Trial of a Time Lord. Isn't this crazy?
It's doing Trial of a Time Lord in order?
It might be. What if it actually does this one and then Ultimate Foe, though? Just cut to the end.
Oh no, missing out the best one.
It's our first Colin Baker episode.
It really is.
Yeah.
This is very exciting. This is going to take me right back to the me of 1986 that was so trying to like this story.
Yeah.
That's what I remember it. I liked it really hard. I tried to get my dad to like it because he was a Troughton era fan, and just didn't take.
I get it. This will be really interesting because it's the second season of Colin Baker.
Yeah,
and there's a lot they were trying differently. It was a very we'll get to it, next week. But there is a lot of interesting things to talk about around the show itself of this era. So
we're going to be able to talk. We're going to be able to talk about the Time Lords. We're going to be able to talk about the Valiard, which is wonderful. We're going to get into all that deep stuff about the Doctor's future regenerations. So don't miss that.
Yes. All right. God, wow. I feel like it's so different from what we just came from. It's really we're diving into a different pool, but it's going to be awesome.
Yep.
But guys, thanks for being in this pool with us for the last little bit. We are Pool to Open, the podcast. It's a podcast. If you haven't yet subscribed, I don't know how you wouldn't be, but if you haven't, go ahead and hit that plus button or whatever it is that gets you to subscribe to this. Please do. Please tell your friends about it. Please tell your Doctor Who fan friends about it. Obviously, your Doctor Who fan loving or Doctor Who loving family who are clearly fans. All of them. Subscribe. Leave us a review on the platform that you're listening. That would be amazing. Reviews really do help us out. We're available on Apple, Spotify, Google, all the good places that you find fine podcasts. We're there. Please subscribe, leave a review, follow us on the socials. TikTok, of course, we're at Pull2Open, and on Twitter and Instagram at Pull2Open63. See you next time when we travel to the mysterious planet.
And put ourselves on trial. All right, guys. See you then.
Take it easy.